Chapter 1. A Visitor in the Night. October 18th. That same night, after she had shut down her dating site profile, Elli had a very strange dream. She was back in her childhood home, in the apartment she had grown up in. That on its own was nothing new. She often dreamed of her childhood home, as probably many people do. She was not a child, though, but in her present-day adult form, which was telling her the events in the dream had to be current. Was she still living there? Her parents were apparently home too. They could be heard somewhere in the background, but not as active participants, more like an impression, a knowing, a voice talking from another room, or some distant shape or shadow. Like the ambience in a computer game or a movie, background noise. There was a faint image of her father moving around, in a good mood and arranging or working on something, like he often did. For some reason, Elli saw his smiley face in her mind's eye, the same expression he had when he was happily in his own zone, unbothered by others, or pleased about something, which was often something he himself had done. A sudden knock came at the door, or perhaps a doorbell. Elli went to open the door. A tall, lean figure, dressed all in black, stood outside in the corridor, with a shy but also somewhat mischievous smile on his face. Elli went into her full professional mode, acting as if it was not her home but a guest house, smiling back at him pleasantly when opening the door for him, as if he had been invited. Maybe he was? Who can tell exactly in dreams? Elli knew who the young man was, although he couldn't have known her in person. Tall, charming, and devilishly handsome, with long dark hair, Asian features, and unexpectedly deep voice, he was a popular figure on social media with quite a large following. Elli was not one to religiously fangirl anyone, but she could appreciate beauty and character, both of which this guy definitely had, with a dose of flamboyance to add to the already spicy mix. She had come across his videos at random, or perhaps it was the YouTube fairy, and she wasn't just intrigued by his striking looks, but by how he carried himself in general, and the way he occasionally chose to discuss some more spiritual topics in that resounding deep voice of his. There was something about a great voice. Yes, as much as she told herself that she had to look for more depth in people, but sometimes it was great just to enjoy someone's more physical essence. She was only human, and he seemed like the whole package. Handsome, daring, intelligent, outspoken, not to mention his captivating eyes and gorgeous, cheeky smile that he had now turned towards her. That smile alone could melt a stone. Oh dear. Elli had no idea what his real name was, but he called himself Marcel, despite obviously being from somewhere in Asia. That wasn't the only contrast either. He liked to accentuate his eyes with makeup that gave him a more feminine appearance, and yet, when he spoke, you were left gaping. No, honey, that no girl. Somehow, in the dream, Elli managed to remain mostly unfazed by this unexpected but welcome visit, as if it was the most natural thing in the world to have some handsome stranger randomly walk into your home. Like a good host, although with a slight quizzical look on her face, she was to give him a tour around her home. Marcel followed her politely around the living room, with Elli pointing to some things like house plants on top of the large cabinet, explaining what they were like a proper tour guide. Look, here's a flower pot with a plant inside, and these are its leaves. Huh? Dreams really were weird like that. Marcel was walking with her, cordially acknowledging what Elli was talking about, but he seemed to have a different purpose there altogether. All the while she was calmly presenting different parts of the room, which really wasn't interesting at all. He was flirting with her. No, more than that. He was coming on strong to her, not outright touching her like some annoying partygoers might, but a slight brush against her here and there. The single-minded signal could be clearly read through his gaze, his cheeky smile and whole being, wordlessly trying to get her to sleep with him. A silent, unspoken charm. Interesting, especially because there was a certain shyness to him as well. Again, dreams are hard to put into words, and we feel things there that would not necessarily make sense in the real world. She just knew, without having to be told a word. Well, she did find him super attractive, so she enjoyed his little game, the attention and the flirt, while continuing to show him around her home, amused and smiling to herself. She gave him a pleasant smile too, but wasn't going to give in so easily just because he was hot, especially with her dad being somewhere in the house and all. That alone should have been a huge stop sign. But again, what is going on in the subconscious dream spaces can be extremely bizarre. Some psychology books could be written based on this little fragment alone, I'm sure. Elli continued on to the kitchen, perhaps as the next part of the tour she was giving the handsome visitor. Marcel again quietly followed. He was then walking straight out to the small balcony and turned around to face her. With a general air of nonchalance, he leaned his tall, black-clad figure casually against the balustrade, looking at her with sparks in his eyes, smiling, inviting, waiting. Everything behind him fell into darkness. It had suddenly turned into night, even though there had been plenty of natural light in the living room just a few moments ago. Marcel's whole demeanor remained playful and flirty, not having given up trying to silently seduce her into getting physical with him. Elli, still a bit careful, but also deciding to have some fun, joined him on the balcony, finally fully responding to his invitation and allowing him to pull her closer. It felt really good, even though she knew with every fiber of her body it would have been just a thing of the moment. Lust and desire, not love, a physical pull. She didn't care. She wanted it. She was ready. Right at that moment, she woke up. Damn! Why, universe? Just when it was getting good. Would they actually have done it? With her dad at home? He seemed to be completely oblivious to what was going on, but still. Elli had already given in to Marcel's advances, letting him toy with her, reaching the point of wanting it to happen. And then it was gone. He was gone. And she was back in her room, in her small bed, surrounded by her grandparents' furniture. What a moment to wake up to, though. And what a strange dream. It left her feeling very surreal, but also weirdly excited, like something had awoken inside her. There was a curious sense about this whole thing, a strong impression of something. She could tell it wasn't about love or anything deeper like that, just desire and crushing over some hot guy, but there had been something else to it at the same time. As if he was sent by someone. He didn't seem to be there of his own accord. It had felt like an invitation, teasing, seducing, and at the same time, he seemed sort of far, distant, as if he was not doing it for himself. Heck, he didn't even know of her existence in the real world. An impression of a word came to her mind, out of the blue. Escort. Someone paid to perform a certain task, even physical, and while making all the right moves, it would always feel like a job he had signed up to do. Because it was. Wide awake, Elli couldn't stop thinking about the dream, and she was pondering what it all meant. It was also odd to her that Marcel had been in her dream out of the blue like that, because she had only seen a few of his videos altogether, none of which was very recent. It was after all normal for those things and people you had seen or interacted with a day or so before to come up in your dreams, right? What or who you thought about before you fell asleep, right? But she hadn't. There was no recent connection that she could think of. Elli's hopes for having some real excitement in her otherwise boring life, however, returned. She was absolutely thrilled. Marcel was exactly the type of a guy that would make her fawn over someone, from a distance of course. And the way he usually expressed his thoughts had intrigued her already before. Attractive as hell, smart, spiritual, creative, expressive. What else do you need? Well, obviously his gorgeous smile too. Innocent looking, yet cheeky. Dangerous. She could fall for a smile like that alone. Boyish charm, but with depth in his eyes. Why weren't there anyone like that in her world? Hadn't Marcel spent some time in a small city in Europe some months back? She remembered him discussing some of his dating ventures there, using a dating app? Driven by sudden excitement, Elli came up with a crazy idea to try and find him on the app, where she could change her location to other countries, to tell him about the weird dream. It felt too significant to simply ignore. If she managed to find him, maybe they could at least get a good laugh out of it. That wasn't stalking, right? She had a reason. The more Elli thought about it, though, the more she started doubting her own sanity. It was crazy, right? Regardless, she decided to go through with it. She had to at least try, even though she was equally terrified of her actually finding him, and then him not responding to her, or laughing at her instead. Still, she would try. "You don't live in fear," someone she once knew had said to her. She had agreed. How can magic happen if you don't do something crazy every once in a while, or don't take any risks? She had to be brave. Wasn't that where all the best stories came from? Someone finding the courage to do something they were afraid of doing. After she had truly gotten herself up from bed and completed her morning duties, she eagerly dug out her dating site logins again and restored her account. Good thing technology allowed you to do that, right? Changing her location pin to the city where she last heard Marcel had resided, she started scanning the long list of guys in that region. Not that one. Not that one. Not that one. Nope. 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 Not him. Nope. Not those ones either. Page after page, the faces remained unfamiliar, and pretty soon started to meld into a similar homogeneous mass she had already grown tired of. No long dark hair. No model-like faces. No eyeliner. No flamboyance. Sad. Elli scrolled and scrolled until she realized she was acting completely crazy, and that someone like Marcel would probably never be on that app in the first place, and that it was all pointless and hopeless. The excitement from the dream that had been the driving force behind getting her back on the dating site started to subside, leaving her again disappointed in the grey and cloudy October days that were now turning chillier by day, replacing the warmth of the beautiful September golden sun. What had she actually been hoping for? She knew nothing of the real person behind the public face, after all. More importantly, did she even want to know him, as the person he might have been underneath his popular social media facade? Elli thought about it and found that yes, she did. It would have been very cool to be friends with someone like him, even just to hang out and talk about deep stuff. He fascinated her, the contrast between his more feminine features and his naturally deep voice, but especially what he talked about. most model-looking guys she knew of didn't really bother with the deeper and more spiritual subjects, and none dared to be that expressive with their looks. Asia was a different world, however, especially with the expanding K-pop culture, and she had never known anybody so unique like him, unless we're talking about unreachable superstars such as David Bowie, who belong into a category all on its own when it comes to self-expression. One can always dream. To keep it real, Elli tried to genuinely imagine them hanging out, laughing, being friends, having conversations, just to see if she could even picture it. She could. He was not yet that well known, so it could happen. Anything could happen. But why would Marcel even want to hear from a random person with a crazy dream? It was insane, right? People dream all the time, probably about him too. He must have received a ton of fan mail already, and had all sorts of women fawning over him because of his face and charm alone. Elli was nobody special. Also, she didn't really want to be one of those women, just about superficial attraction. She cared more about what people had to say than their looks, but couldn't help enjoying some eye candy. Nor should she. For one last time, trying to brush aside her disappointment, she scanned the list of people in Marcel's supposed city to see if there was at least someone else worth checking out, so it wouldn't be a complete waste of time. Maybe he wasn't even there anymore. After a while scrolling, one profile suddenly caught her eye. Just one face among hundreds that was a stark contrast to all the others who seemed to have copy-pasted their faces and descriptions. She was stopped on her tracks. Here was a 29-year-old guy with tan skin, long dark hair like Marcel's, and striking features, also not unlike Marcel. Attractive for sure, at first glance. He was also the same age Elli had been when her whole world collapsed. She clicked on the profile, almost fascinated, and completely beyond caring by that time that whoever she clicked on would be shown that she had visited their profile. She had tried so many times, made so many efforts, explained so many times about what she was after, heard from so many people what they expected, and rarely did they coincide. The young man she was now looking at had a completely different story on his profile. He called himself Eosphorus, which was probably some Greek philosopher rather than his real name, but who knows? The modern-day parents gave their kids the weirdest names sometimes, and who was Elli to judge? She didn't have her real name on there in any case. His photos looked promising. No sign of a motorcycle, fish, or any muscle flexing in the gym. Instead, he seemed to love to travel, a world citizen like she considered herself to be. Moreover, he was super handsome, and not in a cheesy, oiled-up gym guy way. Still, she could tell right away that he had put some effort into both his photos and his looks. It reminded Elli of what an old friend had once told her about one of her photos. In the early days of social media, when people started to connect with each other online like that for the very first time. In some of his first messages to her, he had said something about how, on her photo, she had the look of someone who knew she was attractive. At the time, it had really surprised her, as she had only just grown out of what she felt was her ugly duckling phase, meaning everything until she was around 21 years old. Barely a year before meeting that friend online, she had taken a big leap of faith and moved to another country, where for the first time in her life she was taking steps towards independence after a breakup from a 3-year-long relationship. The first real steps out of her comfort zone, discovering her somewhat foolhardy courage to just jump into unknown waters without any backup plan. Elli continued to look through the new guy's photos. There was something soft, even vulnerable, behind his nonchalant, confident exterior, and she wondered whether it was unintentional. And was that eyeliner on one of the photos? Ha! He was describing himself as a black metal guitarist who apparently liked horror movies a lot. Damn, she didn't like either, at all. There had been a few metal music fans in her past, with whom she had occasionally crossed swords in the lifelong argument of whether electronic music should be considered real music, and was it not only live music played with real instruments that deserved to be called music. She was not about to get into another such argument with metal people, as she called them. Oh well. She read on. Aside from his apparent fascination with some darker arts, it seemed he was also interested in some spiritual matters. Good. Some movies she liked. Promising. And a few things she didn't even know about. When she Googled them, however, she wasn't quite sure what to think of them. Not exactly her cup of tea, like a lot of other things among his long list of interests. But she was also intrigued, being always curious about why people felt how they did about the things they liked. Especially if those things were opposite to what she liked or came with a specific belief system attached. Elli wanted to know both sides, not just her side. Black and white, dark and light, contrast. How do you grow, after all, if you only know what you already know? Some other things on his profile made her question if he wasn't actually a bit too much for her to handle. It smelled like trouble, or too far towards the dark side. He also seemed to be rather confident in himself, or was it something else? She couldn't quite put a finger on it. Still, it was the closest glimpse to what she had been looking for in that whole dating site world, for days. And yet, she did not message him. She had learned when she should not play with fire, because she was so easily drawn in, something the dream also had shown. She was smarter now, should be at least. There were a few burns she was still healing from. With a sigh, and a certain sense of relief that came from almost being proud of herself for saying no, she left the handsome metal guy's profile and decided again to put the dating site behind her. It was not for her. She delayed briefly, giving one final, long glance to the general list of people, represented by small round icons with their photo. The dozens and dozens of bubbles with faces on them now looked even more like a grey mass of nondescript features. It was time. With the last drops of her hope of finding anyone worthwhile on a dating site trickling out, she prepared to pull the plug, putting her phone aside for a moment with a deep exhale. Now what? She thought to herself, sitting on her bed and looking out of the window towards the ever-present grey clouds. Back to square one? Her phone buzzed. It was a message. From him! The handsome, long-haired metal guy. Elli couldn't help but smile. Somehow she had known, or perhaps hoped for, despite everything, that it was coming, and that was what had made her delay. And if there was anything she could be sure of in this world at that moment, it was knowing that this was not going to be boring, no matter where it led to. Well, she was right. Although she had no idea it would become one of the most important encounters of her life so far.